The first time I saw him, I was carrying a wooden beam across my shoulders. It was an early June morning, the kind where dew still clung to grass stems and the air held that clean, expectant quality that comes before true summer heat. The sky stretched endless above us, a canvas of pale blue unmarked by clouds. A perfect day for raising a barn. The fire had happened 3 nights before. Lightning struck the miller's barn during the storm, they said. By the time anyone noticed, flames had already consumed most of the eastern wall. We saved the livestock, but the structure itself was beyond salvaging. I remember standing with the others, watching orange light dance against the night sky, feeling the strange mixture of awe and sorrow that comes from witnessing destruction so complete. But that is our way. What God takes away, we rebuild together. By sunrise the following morning, word had spread through our community. The barn raising would happen that Saturday. Every able-bodied man and boy would come. The women would prepare food. The children would carry nails and tools. This is how we have always lived, bound to each other through work and faith, and the simple understanding that no one stands alone. I was 20 that summer. Not yet baptized into the church, though everyone assumed I would be that autumn. My father spoke of it as a certainty, the way he spoke of the seasons changing or the wheat ripening. My mother had already begun setting aside fabric for my new Sunday clothes. The path before me was clear, worn smooth by generations of faithful feet. I never questioned it, not until that day. The Miller property sat 2 miles from ours. I walked behind our buggy, preferring the quiet of my own thoughts to the cramped bench where my 3 younger brothers sat with my parents. The morning air felt good in my lungs. Birds called from fence posts. My muscles, already strong from farm work, tightened pleasantly under the weight of the tool bag slung across my back. I did not know then that my life would cleave into before and after, that something as ordinary as a barn raising would become the divide across which I would forever measure my days. By the time I arrived, the foundation was already marked out. Men gathered in clusters, discussing measurements and wood quantities. Women set up trestle tables beneath old oak trees, laying out tablecloths and setting water pitchers in the shade. Children darted between adults, their bare feet kicking up dust, their laughter rising above the serious murmur of work being planned. Bishop Lapp stood at the center, his beard gleaming silver in the sunlight, gesturing as he spoke. My father had already joined him, nodding at whatever was being said. I deposited my tools with the others and waited to be assigned my task. That's when I saw him. He stood apart from the others, one shoulder resting against the trunk of a maple tree. His clothes marked him immediately as an outsider. Faded blue jeans instead of black trousers, a plain white t-shirt where we all wore button-up shirts, sleeves rolled to the elbows rather than fastened properly at the wrists. Work boots, scuffed and worn. His hair was neither cropped short like the English, nor grown long and covered like ours. It fell somewhere in between, dark waves that caught the sunlight when he moved his head. But it was the way he held himself that caught my attention. There was an ease to him, a casual confidence I had never learned. We are taught from childhood to be humble, to keep our eyes lowered, to speak softly and without pride. This man leaned into the world as though he expected it to make room for him. "Who is that?" I asked Daniel Troyer, who stood beside me sorting nails into buckets. Daniel glanced up, following my gaze. "Some English cousin of Rachel Miller's," he said, disinterest evident in his voice. "From Ohio, I think, here to help for the day." I nodded and returned to my work, but my eyes kept finding their way back to the stranger. I watched as Bishop Lapp approached him, as they spoke briefly, as the stranger smiled, a crooked, easy smile that transformed his face. The bishop gestured toward the pile of lumber, and the stranger nodded, pushing himself away from the tree. The morning progressed as barn raisings always do. We moved through the familiar rhythm of work, measuring, sawing, lifting, securing. Sweat began to darken the backs of shirts as the sun climbed higher. The air filled with the sweet smell of fresh-cut pine and the staccato percussion of hammers striking nails. I lost sight of the stranger for a while, absorbed in my own tasks. I had been assigned to the framing crew, a position of some responsibility given my skill with woodwork. My hands knew what to do without much thought from me. The familiar motions left my mind free to wander. It was nearly noon when Bishop Lapp's voice cut through the general clamor. "Eli," he called to me, "take these measurements to the cutting team, then help that fellow with the west wall framing. He's strong enough, but doesn't know our methods." I followed the direction of his gesture and felt something clench inside my chest. The stranger was attempting to position a large beam, his muscles straining visibly beneath his thin shirt. The garment had darkened with sweat, clinging to the contours of his back. As I watched, he paused to wipe his forehead with his forearm, tipping his face toward the sun. Light caught in his hair, turning the edges to gold. I swallowed hard and nodded to the bishop. "Yes, sir." My feet felt suddenly awkward as I crossed the work site. I delivered the measurements first, grateful for the delay, unsure why my heart had begun to beat so rapidly. I had never been shy around strangers before. We often had visitors, drivers, tourists curious about our ways, business people who bought our furniture or produce. I spoke to them easily enough, but as I approached the west wall, something like nervousness fluttered in my stomach. He saw me coming and straightened, offering that same easy smile I'd noticed earlier. Up close, I could see that his eyes were green, not the pale, washed-out green of early corn husks, but a deeper shade that made me think of the moss that grows on the north side of our barn after spring rains. "You must be my new partner," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Matt Kendrick." I stared at his hand for a moment before remembering to take it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused but warmer than I expected. "Eli," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Eli Yoder." "Eli," he repeated, as though testing how my name felt in his mouth. "Good to meet you. I'm making a mess of this, I think. Carpentry isn't exactly my strong suit." I looked at the section he'd been working on. The angle was slightly off, and he'd used too many nails, but it wasn't terrible for someone unused to our methods. "It's not so bad," I said, "but maybe I should show you how we usually do it." He stepped back, gesturing to the work area with a sweep of his arm. "I'm all yours." Something about the phrase made heat rise to my face. I ducked my head and moved past him, focusing intently on the task at hand. "We placed the studs 16 inches apart," I explained, measuring and marking the base plate. "And we assemble the wall on the ground, then raise it all at once." Matt crouched beside me, watching my hands. He was close enough that I could smell him, sweat and soap, and something else I couldn't name, something distinctly different from the familiar scents of the men I'd grown up around. "Makes sense," he said, more efficient than what I was attempting. I handed him the pencil. "Mark every 16 inches while I cut the studs to length." Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I pulled away too quickly. If he noticed my awkwardness, he gave no sign of it. He simply took the pencil and began measuring, his movements precise despite his claimed inexperience. We worked in silence for several minutes. I was grateful for the reprieve, for the chance to compose myself. The inexplicable nervousness I'd felt began to subside as we settled into the familiar rhythm of work. "So," Matt said eventually, breaking the silence, "you do this often? Barn raisings?" I nodded, focusing on the board I was cutting. "When needed, usually once or twice a year somewhere in the community." "It's amazing," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Where I'm from, if someone's house burned down, they'd be filing insurance claims and arguing with contractors for months." I allowed myself to look at him then. He was smiling again, but there was something wistful in his expression. "This is our way," I said simply. "We take care of our own." "Must be nice," he replied, "belonging like that." There was a weight to his words that caught me off guard, a hint of something like longing. Before I could respond, he cleared his throat and gestured to the markings he'd made. "Did I get these right?" I checked his work, nodding my approval. "Perfect." His smile widened, and something warm unfurled inside my chest, a strange, unfamiliar feeling that both frightened and intrigued me. "High praise from the expert," he said, and though his tone was light, I sensed he meant it. We continued working, our conversation coming easier now. He asked questions about the barn, how long it would take to complete, how we knew what to do without detailed plans, whether I enjoyed the work. I answered as best I could, surprised by how comfortable it felt to talk to him, despite his obvious differences from everyone I knew. The sun climbed higher, beating down on our backs as we worked. Matt's shirt clung to him, revealing the play of muscles beneath as he lifted and positioned beams. I found my gaze lingering on the slope of his shoulders, the line of his jaw, the way sweat gathered at his temples before he wiped it away. I had never looked at another person this way before, with this strange, hungry attention to detail. It unsettled me. I forced my eyes away, focusing instead on the task before us. By midday, the west wall frame was complete. We stood back, assessing our work as other men gathered around, preparing to help us lift it into place. "Ready?" my father called from the other end. At our nod, he began the count. 1, 2, 3, lift! The wall rose smoothly, a dozen pairs of hands guiding it upward. The satisfaction of seeing our morning's work stand vertical sent a familiar thrill through me. Matt let out a soft whoop of delight beside me, his green eyes bright with accomplishment. "That's something else," he said, watching as the wall was secured to the foundation. "Built with our own hands. Our hands." The phrase lingered in my mind as we stepped back to let others secure the braces. The dinner bell rang out across the property, a clear, bright sound that signaled the midday meal. Work paused as men set down tools and wiped brows, turning toward the oak trees where women had laid out the feast. "Come," I said to Matt, suddenly aware of how thirsty I was. "Time to eat." He fell into step beside me as we crossed the yard. "I've never been so hungry in my life," he admitted. "Is it always this physical?" I nodded. "Honest work builds appetite and strength. And humility, apparently," he laughed. "I thought I was in decent shape before today." I glanced sideways at him. Despite his complaints, he moved with easy grace, no real evidence of fatigue in his stride. His profile against the bright sky made something catch in my throat, the straight line of his nose, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, the curve of his lips as he smiled at some private thought. I looked away quickly, confused by my own reaction. The meal was served buffet-style, long tables laden with food prepared by the women of our community. Fried chicken, ham, roast beef, mashed potatoes, gravy, corn pudding. Bread still warm from the oven, butter melting into its surface. Pies of every description, apple, cherry, choufle, waiting for after the main course. Matt's eyes widened at the spread. "Do you eat like this every day?" A small laugh escaped me. "No, this is for the barn-raising special occasion." "Thank God," he said, grabbing a plate. "Otherwise, I'd have to move here permanently just for the food." Something about the casual way he said it, as though it were a real possibility, him staying, made my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. We filled our plates and found a spot in the shade of a large oak tree, slightly removed from the larger groups. I hadn't intentionally sought privacy, but as we settled onto the grass, I realized we were somewhat isolated from the others. Matt didn't seem to notice or mind. He took a bite of fried chicken and closed his eyes in appreciation. "This is incredible," he said after swallowing. "Who do I thank for this masterpiece?" I surveyed the groups of women, probably Rebecca Lapp. She's known for her chicken. "I should propose marriage immediately," he said, taking another bite. I smiled despite myself. She's 63 and has been married to the bishop for 40 years. "Tragic," Matt sighed dramatically. "All the good ones are taken." I laughed then, a real laugh that surprised me with its ease. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that during a work gathering. We were always respectful, focused on the task at hand. Joy came from work well done, not from idle conversation. Matt seemed pleased by my reaction. His green eyes crinkled at the corners, and he nudged my shoulder lightly with his own. "So you can laugh. I was beginning to wonder." The brief contact sent a strange current through me. I busied myself with my food, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands, my eyes, my smile. "I laugh," I said finally, "when there's reason. And my tragic love life qualifies." He raised an eyebrow, still smiling. I felt heat rise to my face again. "I didn't mean—" "I'm teasing you, Eli," he said gently. "You're too easy to fluster." No one had ever said such a thing to me before. In our community, teasing was for children, not adult men working together, and yet I didn't mind it from him. It felt like a private language, something just between us. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the property. In the distance, children played a game of tag, their laughter carrying on the warm air. Women gathered empty plates and began setting out desserts. Men clustered in conversation, some already returning to work. "So," Matt said eventually, setting his empty plate aside, "Rachel told me you're good with your hands." She wasn't wrong. I looked down at my hands resting on my knees, broad palms, long fingers, calluses on the pads from years of work. Just hands, nothing special to my eyes. "I work wood," I said with a small shrug. "My father taught me." "It shows. You have confidence when you build. Not everyone does." There was a quality to his voice, a genuine admiration untainted by the competitive edge I often heard when men in our community complimented each other's work. It warmed something in me. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling unpracticed in my mouth. We didn't often exchange compliments. Matt leaned back on his elbows, his face tipped toward the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. His throat made a long, tanned line, his Adam's apple pronounced above the collar of his t-shirt. "What about you?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "What work do you do?" He glanced at me, something flickering behind his eyes. "This and that. Lately I've been doing construction in Columbus. Before that, I worked on a fishing boat in Oregon. For a while I tended bar in Nashville." I tried to imagine such a life, moving from place to place, job to job, no roots or community to anchor you. It seemed both terrifying and oddly appealing. "Why so many changes?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I guess I've been looking for something," he said finally. "Not sure what yet, but I figure I'll know it when I find it." There was a vulnerability in his admission that caught me off guard. Behind his easy confidence, I glimpsed something else, a searching quality, a restlessness I recognized because I'd felt its echo in my own chest on quiet nights when sleep eluded me. Before I could respond, Bishop Lapp's voice rose above the general conversation, calling men back to work. Matt sighed and pushed himself upright. "Duty calls," he said, gathering our plates. "Thanks for the company, Eli." As we stood, I noticed a thin line of red across his palm, a cut, probably from a wood splinter or nail. "Your hand," I said, reaching for it without thinking. "You're hurt." He looked surprised as I took his hand in mine, turning it to examine the cut. It wasn't deep, but it had bled enough to leave a dried streak across his palm. "It's nothing," he said, but he didn't pull away. His hand felt different from any I'd held before, larger than my brother's, rougher than my father's. My fingers trembled slightly as I traced the edge of the wound, a strange intimacy in the gesture that I didn't fully understand. "We should clean it," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Prevent infection." Matt was watching me, his expression unreadable. "If you insist, doctor," he said finally, the lightness in his tone belied by the intensity of his gaze. I released his hand reluctantly and led him to the water pump at the side of the yard. He followed without comment as I worked the handle, cool water spilling into the basin below. I gestured for his hand again, and he offered it without hesitation. The water ran clear over his skin, washing away dried blood and dirt. I held his hand steady, aware of the contrast between us, his tanned skin against my paler complexion, his blunt fingernails against my longer ones. Something about the simple act of washing his wound felt profound, as though it carried a significance beyond the mere cleaning of a cut. "There," I said, releasing him and stepping back. "Better." He flexed his fingers, water droplets catching sunlight as they fell. "Thanks," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Been a while since anyone fussed over me." I didn't know how to respond to that. In our community, we cared for each other as a matter of course. The idea that he had no one to fuss over him struck me as unutterably sad. "We should get back to work," I said instead, uncomfortable with the surge of feeling his words had prompted. He nodded, and we returned to the barn site in silence. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. The frame rose steadily around us, wooden skeleton reaching toward the sky. Matt and I were assigned to different tasks, but I remained aware of him throughout the day. His laugh carrying across the site, the flash of his white t-shirt among the black-clad men, the way he stooped to help a child gather spilled nails. As twilight approached, the main structure stood complete. The roof would be finished tomorrow, along with the siding and interior walls, but the accomplishment of the day was evident in the barn's silhouette against the darkening sky. Men began cleaning up tools, gathering in groups to admire their work before heading home. I searched for Matt among them, finding him at last near the newly raised barn, alone. He stood with one shoulder leaning against a support beam, gazing up at the structure. The fading light cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. I approached slowly, reluctant to disturb whatever reverie held him. "It's something, isn't it?" I said as I drew near. "A day's work made solid." He turned to me, his expression softening. "It's incredible. Where I come from, nothing happens this fast. Nothing brings people together like this. It's our way," I said simply, echoing my words from earlier. He nodded, his gaze returning to the barn. "Your way has a lot to recommend it." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sounds of conversation and horses being hitched to buggies carrying on the evening air. Most families were preparing to leave, but a few men would stay overnight to guard the site and prepare for tomorrow's work. My father had volunteered me for this duty, and I had accepted without question, as was expected. "Are you staying?" Matt asked, as though reading my thoughts. I nodded. "Until tomorrow." "You?" "Rachel offered me her spare room, but I thought I might stay here with the overnight crew." He glanced at me, a question in his eyes. "If that's all right." "Of course," I said, perhaps too quickly. "We could use the help." His smile in response made something warm bloom in my chest. As the last families departed, those staying behind gathered near a small fire pit where the women had left a pot of stew simmering. There were 5 of us in total: Bishop Lapp, Daniel Troyer, myself, Matt, and old Jacob Fisher, who always volunteered for night watch despite his 70 years. We ate quietly, exhaustion from the day's labor settling into our muscles. Bishop Lapp said the evening prayer, and Jacob soon after retreated to one of the tents set up for sleeping. Daniel engaged the bishop in conversation about the next day's work, leaving Matt and me sitting in comfortable silence by the dying fire. "Want to walk?" Matt asked suddenly, his voice low. "I'd like to see what we accomplished today." I nodded, setting my empty bowl aside. We rose together and moved away from the fire's glow, circling the dark silhouette of the barn. The night was warm, the air heavy with the scent of fresh-cut wood and summer grass. Above us, stars punctured the velvet darkness, more visible here away from town lights than they would be in most places. Matt walked close enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed, each brief contact sending a jolt through me that I couldn't explain. We made a full circuit of the barn in silence before he spoke again. "You don't talk much," he observed, his voice gentle in the darkness. "But I feel like I hear you anyway." The words caught me off guard. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. In our community, plain speaking was valued. There was little room for reading between lines or intuiting unspoken thoughts. "What do you hear?" I asked, curious despite myself. He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had dropped even lower, meant only for me. "I hear someone who belongs to this life, but maybe wonders about others. Someone who finds peace in work, but maybe yearns for something more." He paused, then added softly, "Someone who sees me differently than most people do." My heart hammered against my ribs. His words came too close to thoughts I'd barely acknowledged to myself. Whispered questions in the dark of night, quickly silenced by morning prayers. "You imagine things," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. He stopped walking, turning to face me. In the faint starlight, I could just make out the contours of his face, the glint of his eyes as they searched mine. "Do I?" he asked. "Or do I just say what you can't?" Everything I had been taught, every sermon, every lesson, every unspoken rule, told me to step back, to end this conversation, to return to the others by the fire. Everything I knew told me this path led to places I shouldn't go. But I remained rooted in place, caught in the gravity of his gaze. "I don't know what you mean," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. He took a step closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I think you do." We stood like that for what felt like eternity, balanced on the knife edge of something I couldn't name. The night pressed in around us, intimate as a confession. "Eli," he said finally, my name a question in his mouth. I couldn't answer. Didn't know how. He shifted, reaching out slowly. I held my breath as his fingers brushed my collarbone, a touch so light it might have been imagined. "Sawdust," he murmured, his fingertips lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You ever wonder what it'd be like to want something you can't name?" My breath stuttered in my chest. I knew I should step away, knew I should make some excuse and return to the safety of the fire and the others. But some deeper current held me fast, a recognition that flowed between us, powerful as a river current. Matt took another step closer, near enough now that I could feel his breath warm against my face. The world narrowed to this moment, this man, this unnamed thing unfolding between us. And then, "You ever wonder what it'd be like to want something you can't name?" My breath stuttered in my chest. I knew I should step away, knew I should make some excuse and return to the safety of the fire and the others. But some deeper current held me fast, a recognition that flowed between us, powerful as a river current. Matt took another step closer, near enough now that I could feel his breath warm against my face. The world narrowed to this moment, this man, this unnamed thing unfolding between us. And then, "Eli." My father's voice cut through the darkness, shattering the moment like glass. "Where have you gone, boy?" Matt stepped back immediately, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Something like loss washed through me, though I couldn't explain why. "Here, father," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just checking the north corner brace with Matt." I heard footsteps approaching, saw the bobbing glow of a lantern. Matt moved farther away, creating a respectable distance between us. The spell, whatever it had been, was broken. "Bishop Lapp wants to discuss tomorrow's schedule," my father said as he reached us, his lantern casting strange shadows across the newly raised beams. He glanced at Matt, nodding politely, but without warmth. "You should get some rest, Eli. Dawn comes early." "Yes, father," I said automatically, the familiar response coming to my lips without thought. My father turned back toward the campfire, clearly expecting me to follow. I hesitated, looking at Matt. His face was half in shadow, but I could see the slight curve of his mouth, not quite a smile, more a question without words. "Tomorrow," he said softly, the single word somehow heavy with meaning. I nodded once, then followed my father back to the circle of light where the bishop waited. As I sat on a log beside the fire, listening to plans for roof beams and siding, I felt Matt's gaze on me from across the flames. I didn't dare look up, afraid of what might show on my face. Later, as the others settled into their tents, I lay awake on my bedroll, staring at canvas above me. Sleep seemed impossible. My mind circled endlessly around the moment by the barn, the nearness of Matt, the question in his eyes, the way his fingers had brushed my collarbone. Such a small touch. Why did it feel so monumental? Everything I had been taught told me to pray away these thoughts, to confess them as temptation and ask for strength to resist. But as I closed my eyes and tried to form the words, all I could see was Matt's face in the starlight. All I could feel was the ghost of his touch on my skin. I must have slept eventually, because I woke to pale pre-dawn light filtering through the tent canvas. The others still slept, their breathing deep and regular in the quiet morning. Moving silently, I slipped from my bedroll and out of the tent. The world held that hushed quality that comes before true daybreak. Mist clung to the ground in silvery patches, wreathing the half-built barn in gossamer. Dew dampened my boots as I walked toward the structure, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name. I wasn't expecting to find him there. I told myself I was merely checking the work we'd done yesterday, ensuring everything was ready for today's tasks. But when I rounded the corner and saw him standing by a stack of beams, waiting in the gray dawn light, something inside me recognized the truth I'd been avoiding. I had hoped he would be here. Matt looked up at my approach, his face lighting with a smile that made my chest tighten. He wore the same clothes as yesterday, his white t-shirt luminous against the shadowed barn wall behind him. "You came," he said softly, as though he'd been uncertain. I stopped a few paces away, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands, my eyes, my beating heart. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Neither could I." We stood in silence for a moment, the distance between us charged with unspoken things. Mist drifted between us, cool against my skin. "I thought about what you asked," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "About wanting something you can't name." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, an opening. "And? I think maybe I do know that feeling." The admission cost me something to make, though I couldn't have said what. He took a step closer, then another. "Eli," he said, my name a current between us. "Every day I come here, I feel more myself than I have in years, and it's because of you." The words struck me like physical blows. No one had ever spoken to me this way before, with such naked honesty, such vulnerability. In our community, feelings remained largely unspoken, especially between men. We showed care through work, through presence, but rarely through words. "You barely know me," I said, though even to my own ears it sounded weak. He shook his head slowly. "That's not true. I know you're kind. I know you're gentle with children and animals. I know you work with precision and care. I know you carry responsibilities with grace." He paused, his gaze holding mine. "I know you see me in a way no one has in a long time." I swallowed hard, unable to look away. "What do you want from me?" I asked, the question raw and honest. "Just time," he said simply. "Moments like this. A chance to know you better." Something about his gentleness, his patience, undid me. I had expected, what? Demands? Pressure? Not this careful respect for boundaries I hadn't even articulated. "We should check the support beams," I said abruptly, needing the safety of work, of purpose. If he was disappointed by my deflection, he didn't show it. He merely nodded and followed me into the barn's skeleton. Morning light began to filter through the open framework, painting stripes of gold across the dirt floor. We moved through the structure, checking joints and braces. I explained each step of the traditional barn-raising process, grateful for the familiar territory. As we worked on tightening a bolt together, his hand steadying the beam while mine worked the wrench, words spilled from me unexpectedly. "I've never wanted anything so badly," I whispered, the confession torn from some deep place inside me. "And I'm terrified of what it means." I didn't look at him as I spoke, focusing instead on the task before me. But I felt his hand leave the beam to rest briefly, warmly on my shoulder. "I know," he said softly. "I know exactly." We finished the work in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, one filled with shared understanding rather than uncertainty. When the bolt was secure, we stepped back together, surveying the work. "Will you show me the rest?" he asked, gesturing toward the upper beams. I nodded, leading him to the ladder that had been set up yesterday evening. We climbed to the hayloft area, still just a platform of rough boards with no walls to enclose it. From this height, we could see across the Miller property to the distant road, the whole world painted in the soft colors of early morning. I settled with my back against one of the main support beams, knees drawn up before me. After a moment's hesitation, Matt joined me, mirroring my posture. Our shoulders nearly touched, separated by mere inches of cool morning air. "It's beautiful up here," he said, gazing out at the landscape. I followed his gaze, seeing my familiar world through new eyes. The gently rolling fields, the distant line of trees marking the creek, the neighboring farms with their white houses and black buggies. It was beautiful, in a quiet, ordered way. "This is all I have ever known," I said. Matt turned to look at me, his profile sharp against the brightening sky. Do you ever wonder what else is out there? The question pierced me with its accuracy. Of course I had wondered. Late at night, or during the long hours of solitary fieldwork, what lay beyond our community borders? What other ways might there be to live? Sometimes, I admitted, but it doesn't matter. This is my place. Is it? He asked gently. Or is it just where you were born? I had no answer for that. We lapsed into silence again, watching as the sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist. Below us, I could hear movement, the others waking, preparing for another day of work. We should go down soon, I said reluctantly. They'll be looking for us. Matt didn't move. Can we stay just a little longer, please? Something in his voice made me turn to him. His eyes held mine, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. And yet, I found myself nodding. A little longer, I agreed. His hand moved then, sliding across the rough boards between us until his fingers brushed against mine. I should have pulled away. Everything I had been taught told me to withdraw from this touch, this temptation. But as his fingers slowly entwined with mine, I remained still, my heart thundering in my chest. We sat like that, hand in hand, for what felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. His palm was warm against mine, his grip firm but gentle. I stared at our joined hands, marveling at how right it felt, how natural, despite everything that told me it was wrong. Eli, he whispered, and I looked up to find his face closer than before, his eyes asking a question I was afraid to answer. But when he leaned forward, closing the distance between us, I didn't pull away. His lips met mine, soft and hesitant at first, a question more than a demand. For one suspended moment, I remained frozen, caught between fear and longing. Then, something broke open inside me, and I was kissing him back, my free hand rising to touch his face, to feel the slight scratch of stubble against my palm. He made a soft sound in the back of his throat, his fingers tightening around mine as the kiss deepened. I had never kissed anyone before, had never imagined my first kiss would be like this, in a half-built barn, with a man I barely knew, with the weight of my community's disapproval hanging over us. And yet, as his lips moved against mine, gentle but insistent, I couldn't imagine it any other way. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, I kept my eyes closed, afraid of what I might see in his face, or what he might see in mine. Look at me, he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. Please. Slowly, I opened my eyes. His face was so close I could see the varying shades of green in his irises, the individual lashes that framed them, the slight flush that colored his cheeks. Are you okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I nodded, unable to find words for the storm of emotions inside me. Relief that this had finally happened. Fear of what it meant. Guilt for betraying everything I'd been raised to believe. And beneath it all, a deep, trembling joy I couldn't deny. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of my hand, the simple gesture somehow more intimate than the kiss we just shared. We should talk about this, he said softly, about what it means. I knew he was right. This wasn't something we could ignore or pretend away. What had happened between us, what was still happening, would have consequences. If anyone finds out, I said, forcing myself to face the reality, I'll be shunned, maybe even excommunicated. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. Shunning wasn't just a punishment, it was exile from everything and everyone I'd ever known. My family would be forbidden to eat with me, to speak to me, to acknowledge my existence in any way. I would become a ghost in my own community. Matt's face tightened with pain, but he nodded. I know, and I'll lose everything I have ever known. But I'd rather lose it all than lose you. The raw honesty in his voice made my throat constrict. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know what I feel when I'm with you. I know I've never felt this way before. He paused, his gaze dropping to our still joined hands. But if you want me to go, if this is too much, I will. I won't make you choose between me and your life here. The offer was genuine. I could hear it in his voice. He would walk away if I asked, would carry whatever this was between us as nothing more than a memory. The choice was mine. I should have said yes, should have asked him to leave, to never return. Should have prayed for forgiveness and recommitted myself to the path laid out for me since birth. Instead, I tightened my grip on his hand. "I don't want you to go," I whispered, the words both a confession and a promise. His smile in response was like sunrise breaking across his face, brilliant and warm. He leaned forward to kiss me again, brief but tender. "Then I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you want me to." The sound of voices below jerked us back to reality. Quickly we separated, moving to opposite sides of the loft as footsteps approached the ladder. "Eli, you up there?" It was Daniel Troyer's voice. "Yes," I called back, willing my voice to remain steady. "Just checking the upper beams. I'll be right down." I glanced at Matt, who nodded in understanding. We couldn't be seen descending together. "You go first," he whispered. "I'll wait a few minutes." I nodded, moving toward the ladder. Before I reached it, he caught my wrist, pulling me back for one more swift, stolen kiss. "Meet me here tonight," he murmured against my lips. "After everyone's asleep." I should have said no. Instead, I nodded, then pulled away and descended the ladder, my heart still racing. The day passed in a blur of activity. The main structure was completed, the roof beams set in place, the walls beginning to take shape. I worked alongside my father and brothers, with Matt assigned to a different team on the far side of the barn. Occasionally, our eyes would meet across the work site, a current of understanding passing between us before we quickly looked away. By evening, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but beneath it hummed an electric anticipation I had never felt before. As families began to leave for the night, I volunteered again for overnight watch. My father raised an eyebrow. 2 nights in a row was unusual, but he merely nodded his approval. Matt also stayed, along with Bishop Lapp and 2 other men from our community. We ate the evening meal together around the fire, conversation sparse and practical. My skin felt too tight, too sensitive, aware of Matt sitting across from me. His presence a constant pull on my attention. After the meal, Bishop Lapp read from the Bible by lantern light, his deep voice rolling over familiar passages. I tried to focus on the words, to find comfort in their familiar rhythm, but my thoughts kept straying to the hayloft, to Matt's hands, his lips, his whispered request to meet. When the reading concluded, we retired to our separate tents. I lay on my bedroll, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft breathing of the others in the tent. Time stretched endlessly as I waited for the camp to quiet completely. Finally, when I was certain the others slept, I slipped silently from my bedroll and out of the tent. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. A half-moon provided just enough light to guide my way to the barn. The structure loomed dark against the night sky, its skeleton more complete than yesterday, but still open to the elements. I hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. What was I doing? This path could only lead to heartache, to loss, to exile from everything I'd ever known. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was Matt's face. All I could feel was the gentle pressure of his lips against mine. With a deep breath, I entered the barn and climbed the ladder to the loft. He was already there, a shadow against the far wall. As I approached, moonlight spilled through the open roof beams, illuminating his face, the hopeful light in his eyes, the careful smile that bloomed as he saw me. "You came," he said softly, echoing his words from this morning. "I came," I agreed, stopping before him, suddenly shy despite everything we'd already shared. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm as they closed around mine. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. He laughed softly, the sound rich in the quiet night. "At least we're honest." I smiled, some of my nervousness easing. He tugged gently on my hand, pulling me down to sit beside him on a spread blanket I hadn't noticed before. "I brought this from Rachel's," he explained, seeing my glance. "Thought it might be more comfortable than bare boards." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. We settled side by side, shoulders touching, looking out through the open frame of the barn at the starlit fields beyond. "Tell me about yourself," Matt said after a comfortable silence. I want to know everything. I laughed softly. There isn't much to tell. I've lived on the same farm my whole life. I work with my father and brothers. I've never been further than the county line. That's the outline, he said, nudging my shoulder gently with his. I want to know what's inside. What do you love? What do you dream about? What makes you happy? The questions caught me off guard. I wasn't accustomed to such direct inquiry about my inner life. In our community, we valued actions over words, deeds over feelings. I love working with wood, I said finally. Creating something useful with my hands. Watching a piece of furniture take shape from raw lumber. I paused, considering. I dream about... I don't know. I've never really thought about it. Everyone dreams, Matt said gently. Even if they don't admit it. I was quiet for a long moment, weighing whether to share the truth. Sometimes, I said finally, I dream about seeing what's beyond our land. Just going somewhere. Anywhere. Seeing something new. I felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. Where would you go first if you could go anywhere? The question opened something in me. A door I'd kept firmly shut for most of my life. The ocean, I said without hesitation. I've seen pictures, but I want to know what it smells like. What the waves sound like. I paused, embarrassed by my own enthusiasm. That probably sounds foolish. Not at all, Matt said, his voice warm. The ocean is worth seeing. Worth experiencing. He squeezed my hand. I worked on a fishing boat off the Oregon coast for almost a year. The Pacific Ocean it's magnificent. Terrifying and beautiful all at once. I turned to him, hungry for details. Tell me about it. And so he did. He described the way the water changed color with the weather. Steel gray under cloudy skies, deep blue on clear days, sometimes green near the shore. He told me about the smell of salt and seaweed, the cry of gulls, the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. He spoke of sunrises over water, the horizon an endless line where sky met sea. I listened, rapt, trying to imagine such vastness, such freedom. His words painted pictures in my mind, pictures of a world I'd never seen but suddenly longed to. You should see it someday, he said, his voice soft with something like hope. I could take you. The offer hung in the air between us, laden with meaning. It wasn't just about seeing the ocean. It was about leaving my community, my family, everything I'd ever known. It was about choosing a different path. Matt, I began, uncertainty clouding my voice. He shook his head quickly. I'm sorry. That was too much, too soon. Forget I said it. But I couldn't forget. The idea had taken root in my mind, a dangerous, tantalizing possibility I had never allowed myself to consider. Tell me about you, I said instead, changing the subject. Why do you move around so much? What are you looking for? He was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the night sky. I guess I've been running, he said finally, from expectations, from disappointment. From myself, maybe. There was pain in his voice, old wounds I couldn't see but could sense. I squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. My father had very specific ideas about who I should be, what I should do with my life. He continued. When I wouldn't be that person, things got difficult between us. I left home at 18 and haven't really stopped moving since. And your mother? I asked gently. Died when I was 12. Cancer. His voice was flat, the grief old but still present. It was just me and my dad after that. And we never really figured out how to talk to each other without her there to translate. I thought of my own family, the unspoken rules, the rigid expectations, but also the deep, abiding love that underpinned everything. For all its strictness, I had never doubted my place in that world, never questioned that I belonged. I'm sorry, I said, the words inadequate but sincere. He nodded, accepting the sympathy without comment. Rachel is my mother's cousin. I barely remember meeting her as a kid. But when I needed somewhere to go, somewhere to, I don't know, figure things out, I remembered she lived out here. Called her on a whim, really. And she took you in, I said, smiling at the thought of stern Rachel Miller opening her home to this decidedly un-Amish relative. Matt laughed softly. She did. Didn't ask many questions, just said I could stay as long as I needed to get my head straight. He paused. I've been here 3 weeks now. Was planning to leave after the barn raising. And now? I asked, my heart suddenly tight in my chest. He turned to me, his hand coming up to touch my face, fingers gentle against my cheek. Now I'm not so sure I want to leave. The simple admission made my breath catch. I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing as his thumb traced the line of my jaw. What is this? I whispered, the question as much for myself as for him. What are we doing? I don't know, he admitted, his voice equally soft. I just know I've never felt this way before, like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. His words echoed something inside me, a recognition I couldn't explain but couldn't deny either. I opened my eyes to find him watching me, his gaze tender in the moonlight. I've never, with anyone, I said, heat rising to my face at the admission. His smile was gentle, understanding. I know. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. This, just being here with you, is enough for me. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in my chest. I wanted more, was afraid of more, couldn't articulate what more even meant. Instead of trying to find words, I leaned forward and kissed him. He responded immediately, one hand cupping my face, while the other remained entwined with mine. The kiss was different from our first, less hesitant, more certain, a shared language we were both learning to speak. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm on my face. You're incredible, Eli Yoder, he whispered. Do you know that? No one had ever called me incredible before. Hard-working, yes. Obedient. Skilled with my hands. But never incredible. Never as though my mere existence was something worthy of wonder. We talked long into the night, sharing stories and silences, occasionally exchanging soft kisses that made my heart race and my skin flush. He told me about the places he'd seen, the chase he'd worked, the people he'd met. I told him about growing up Amish, about my family, about the rhythms of our lives dictated by seasons and tradition. As the night deepened around us, a comfortable intimacy grew between us. He lay back on the blanket, pulling me down beside him. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. His fingers traced idle patterns on my back, occasionally venturing to stroke my hair. If we could do anything, he murmured, his voice vibrating under my cheek. Go anywhere. What would you choose? The question was hypothetical, a shared dream rather than a real plan. Yet as I considered it, possibilities unfurled before me like roads leading in all directions. I'd want to see everything, I said softly. The ocean, mountains, cities with buildings so tall they touch the clouds, places where people live differently, believe differently. I paused, then added more quietly. Places where we could just be together, without hiding. His arms tightened around me. Those places exist, Eli. I've been to them. I lifted my head to look at him, his face shadowed in the dim light. Tell me. And so he did. He described cities where men like us could walk hand in hand without fear, where there were entire neighborhoods, communities, filled with people who loved differently but no less deeply. Places where what we felt wasn't seen as sin, but as another form of love. It sounded like a fairy tale to me, impossible but beautiful. A world I could barely imagine, let alone reach. It sounds wonderful, I said, settling back against his chest. But so far away. Not as far as you think, he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. We fell silent then, the weight of possibilities and impossibilities hanging over us. The night was aging, dawn not far off. Soon, we would need to return to our separate tents, to pretend that nothing had changed when everything had. I should go back, I said reluctantly, making no move to leave the warmth of his embrace. I know, he sighed. Me too. Neither of us moved. His heartbeat continued its steady rhythm beneath my ear, his chest rising and falling with each breath. I had never known such peace, such contentment as I felt in that moment. Eli, he said after a long silence, his voice hesitant. Can I show you something? I nodded, sitting up as he reached into his pocket. He withdrew something small, holding it in his closed fist for a moment before opening his palm to reveal a simple object, a leather cord, the kind we used to tie beams together during construction. I found this yesterday, he said softly. It made me think of you, of us. How something ordinary can become extraordinary when you see it differently. I stared at the leather cord, confused by the significance he seemed to attach to it. I don't understand, I admitted. He took my hand, turning it palm up, and placed the cord in it, his fingers lingering against mine. It's a reminder, he said, of this, of us, of possibilities. As I curled my fingers around the simple token, understanding dawned. He was giving me something of himself, something I could keep when he was gone. A physical reminder that this night, these feelings, had been real. Thank you, I whispered, closing my fist tightly around the cord. He smiled, leaning forward to kiss me once more. This kiss held a different quality, a bittersweet edge, a farewell of sorts. When we separated, I see that the darkness outside the barn had begun to soften, the first hint of dawn approaching. Our time was running out. With reluctance, we gathered ourselves, straightening clothes and hair, erasing the visible evidence of our night together. Matt folded the blanket carefully, tucking it under his arm. I'll go first, he said, his voice low. Wait a few minutes before you follow. I nodded, stealing one last kiss before he turned toward the ladder. He descended quietly, pausing at the bottom to look back up at me, his face already shadowed with longing. Sweet dreams, Eli, he whispered, then slipped out of the barn into the pre-dawn darkness. I waited as he'd instructed, my fingers tracing the leather cord now hidden in my pocket. How could something so simple feel so significant? It was just a piece of leather, meant for construction, not sentiment. And yet, it now carried the weight of everything that had passed between us. When enough time had elapsed, I made my own way down the ladder and out of the barn. The sky had lightened further, a pale gray overtaking the darkness. Soon, the sun would rise, and with it, the rest of the camp. Another day of work would begin. Life would continue as it always had. Except nothing was the same. I was not the same. I had nearly reached the tents when I realized I had forgotten my hat in the loft. Cursing silently, I turned back toward the barn, hoping to retrieve it before anyone else woke. As I approached the structure, I saw a figure silhouetted against the lightening sky. Matt, standing at the edge of the cornfield that bordered the Miller property. He seemed to be waiting, watching the first fingers of dawn stretch across the horizon. Without conscious thought, I changed direction, walking toward him instead of the barn. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, surprise and pleasure crossing his face as he recognized me. I forgot my hat, I explained as I reached him. He smiled. Distracted, were you? The teasing note in his voice made me smile in return. Perhaps. We stood side by side, watching as the sky changed from gray to pink, the first sliver of sun appearing above the distant tree line. The moment felt suspended, perfect in its simplicity. I have to leave today, Matt said suddenly, his voice low. Rachel needs to get back to her shop in town, and I promised I'd go with her. Though I had known this was coming, the words still struck me like physical blows. Will you come back tomorrow? I asked, hating the neediness in my voice. He turned to me, his expression serious. I don't think I should. Why not? The question came out sharper than I intended. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because this, us, it can't go anywhere, Eli. Not without hurting you, hurting your place in your community. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. So you're just going to leave? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. After last night, after everything we said, I'm trying to protect you, he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. You have a life here, a future. I'm just a drifter passing through. That's not true, I said, taking a step closer to him. You're more than that. To me, you're... I stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. What was he to me? This man I barely knew but somehow felt I'd recognized from the moment I saw him. He reached out, his hand warm against my cheek. I know, he said softly. I feel it too, but sometimes feelings aren't enough. They should be, I whispered, leaning into his touch. He smiled sadly. In a perfect world, maybe. We stood like that for a long moment, his palm against my face, my eyes locked with his. The rising sun cast a golden glow over everything, painting the world in warm light that belied the coldness spreading through my chest. Finally, he dropped his hand, reaching into his pocket. I have something else for you, he said, producing another leather cord, identical to the one he'd given me earlier. I found 2 of them. I watched, confused, as he took my hand and placed the second cord in it, curling my fingers around both pieces of leather. If you ever want to see me again, he said, his voice hushed, meet me here next harvest. I'll come back if you want me to. The words were both a promise and a release, giving me time, giving me choice. I clutched the leather cords tightly, feeling their texture against my palm. And if I don't come? I asked, the question tearing at my throat. His smile was gentle, tinged with sadness. Then I'll know you've chosen your path, and I'll wish you nothing but happiness on it. He leaned forward, pressing his lips to my forehead in a kiss that felt like benediction, like goodbye. Then he stepped back, his eyes holding mine one last time. Thank you, Eli Yoder, he said softly, for showing me what it feels like to want something I can finally name. With that, he turned and walked away, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. I stood frozen, the leather cords clutched in my hand, my heart pounding with emotions I had no words for. As he disappeared beyond the cornfield, the ribbons fluttered softly in the morning breeze. I remained rooted in place, caught between 2 worlds, the one I had always known, solid and certain beneath my feet, and the one he had shown me, vast and unknown, but suddenly, achingly possible. The sun rose higher, golden light spilling across the fields. In the distance, I could hear the camp stirring to life, another day beginning. Soon, I would need to return, to take up my tools, to continue building a barn for a community I had never questioned belonging to until now. I looked down at the leather cords in my hand, then carefully tucked them into my pocket, close to my heart. Harvest was 4 months away. 4 months to decide which world I belonged in. 4 months to choose between everything I had ever known and everything I suddenly wanted. With one last glance in the direction Matt had gone, I turned back toward the camp, the weight of possibility heavy in my pocket, the taste of his kisses still lingering on my lips. Fade to black. 4 months is both an eternity and no time at all. Summer bloomed fully across our land, the days stretching long and languid in the heat. I moved through them like a sleepwalker, performing my duties with the same care and precision as always, but feeling somehow removed from them. My body worked in the fields, repaired fences, tended livestock, but my mind wandered elsewhere, to a half-built barn, to moonlight filtering through roof beams, to green eyes and wayward promises. My father noticed the change in me. You seem troubled, son, he said one evening as we sat on the porch, the day's work behind us. Is there something weighing on your heart? I could not meet his eyes. How could I explain that what weighed on me was not a burden, but a possibility? A path diverging from everything he had taught me to value? Just thinking about the baptism, I said instead, the partial truth easier than an outright lie. He nodded, accepting this explanation without question. My baptism into the church was scheduled for October, shortly after harvest. There had never been any doubt that I would take this step, officially binding myself to the community and its ways. Until now, it's natural to feel some apprehension, my father said, his voice gentle. It's a weighty commitment. But you're ready, Eli. I've watched you grow into a man of faith and principle. His pride in me was like a physical weight, pressing against my chest until I could scarcely breathe. I managed a nod, grateful when he turned the conversation to more practical matters. July passed, then August. The miller's barn was completed, the community gathering one final time for a celebration of the finished structure. I searched the crowd surreptitiously, though I knew he wouldn't be there. Matt had returned to Rachel's cousin in Ohio, or so the whispered gossip said. No one seemed to question his departure or remember his presence with any particular significance. No one but me. I kept the leather cords hidden beneath my mattress, taking them out only in the dead of night when the house was silent around me. I would run my fingers over their rough texture, remembering the feel of his hand giving them to me, his voice low in the dawn light. If you ever want to see me again, meet me here next harvest. September brought the first hints of autumn, cooler nights, leaves beginning to turn at their edges. Harvest approached, and with it, the moment of decision I had been both dreading and longing for. The night before the Miller field was scheduled to be harvested, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the leather cords clutched in my palm. By morning, I would need to decide, to meet him or not, to choose between the life I had always known and a leap into the unknown. I thought of Matt, his easy smile, the way his hand felt in mine, the stories he'd told of oceans and cities and places where men like us could walk together without fear. I thought of how alive I'd felt in his presence, as though some part of me that had been sleeping all my life had finally awakened. Then I thought of my family, my father's quiet pride, my mother's gentle care, my brothers working beside me in the fields. I thought of our community, imperfect but steadfast, the rhythm of our days guided by faith and tradition. I thought of the promises I was expected to make in just a few weeks' time, binding myself to this life forever. Dawn found me still awake, no closer to certainty than I had been at nightfall. Breakfast passed in a blur, my mother's concerned glance when I barely touched my food registering dimly through the fog of my thoughts. My father assigned me to the Miller field for the day's harvest, a coincidence that felt like fate or divine intervention. I couldn't decide which. The leather cords burned in my pocket as I rode in the back of the wagon, my brother's conversation washing over me unheard. As we approached the Miller property, my heart began to race, my palms dampening with nervous sweat. The field stretched before us, golden wheat swaying in the morning breeze. Men and boys from throughout the community had gathered, scythes and sickles ready for the day's labor. I searched the faces automatically, though I knew better than to expect him among them. Work began with the familiar rhythm, the swing of the scythe, the satisfying rustle as wheat fell in neat rows, the gathering and binding into sheaves. The sun climbed higher, beating down on bent backs, turning the field into a sea of gold and brown. Sweat soaked through my shirt, plastering it to my skin. As noon approached, I found myself working near the edge of the field, close to the spot where Matt and I had said goodbye 4 months earlier. The memory was so vivid that for a moment, I almost thought I saw him standing there, watching from the shadow of the trees. I blinked, and the apparition vanished. Of course he wasn't there. It wasn't time yet. The harvest would take several days to complete, and I had no way of knowing when or if he would come. The dinner bell rang, calling us to the meal that had been prepared. I set down my scythe, wiping sweat from my brow as I turned toward the house. That's when I saw her, Rachel Miller, walking up the lane toward her property, a basket over her arm. Alone. Without conscious thought, I changed direction, intercepting her path before she reached the meal tables. "Mrs. Miller," I said, removing my hat. "Let me help you with that basket." She looked up, surprise flitting across her features before she nodded. "Thank you, Eli. It's heavier than I expected." I took the basket from her, falling into step beside her as we walked toward the house. My heart hammered in my chest as I searched for a way to ask what I needed to know without revealing too much. "Will you be staying for the entire harvest?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She shook her head. "Just today. My shop needs tending." Rachel owned a small quilting supply store in town, one of the few businesses run by an Amish woman in our community. Her husband's death 5 years ago had left her unexpectedly independent. I nodded, struggling to find a way to ask about Matt without seeming overly interested. "Your cousin's son was helpful during the barn raising," I said finally. Will he be joining us for the harvest as well? Something flickered in Rachel's eyes, a knowing that made my stomach clench with fear. Had she guessed? Had Matt told her? Matthew may be by, she said carefully. He's staying with me again for a little while. My heart leapt at the words, though I kept my expression neutral. That's good. Extra hands are always welcome at harvest. She studied me for a moment longer than was comfortable before nodding. Yes, they are. We had reached the house by then, and she took the basket back from me with a small smile. Thank you for your help, Eli, and for asking after Matthew. I know he considered you a friend during his time here. The word friend felt both inadequate and dangerous. I merely nodded, replacing my hat as I turned back toward the meal tables. He was here. Somewhere nearby, perhaps even in town, just a few miles away. The knowledge hummed through me like electricity, making my skin prickle with anticipation and fear. The afternoon passed in a haze of work and distraction. Every sound from the lane made me look up, expecting to see him walking toward the field. Every unfamiliar figure in the distance made my heart race, but as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, there was still no sign of Matt. As we packed up tools for the day, my father approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. You've been distracted today, he said, his voice holding no accusation, merely observation. Sorry, Father, I replied, keeping my eyes on the scythe I was cleaning. Just tired. He squeezed my shoulder. Perhaps you should head home early. Your mother could use help with the younger boys, and you look like you could use some rest. The suggestion, meant kindly, filled me with panic. If I left now, if I returned home with my family, I might miss my chance. Matt might come, might wait at the edge of the field, might think I had chosen not to meet him, when in truth, I had simply been elsewhere. I promised Bishop Lapp I would help store the harvested wheat in Miller's barn. I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. I'll walk home when we finished. My father frowned slightly. Walking alone after dark was uncommon, though not forbidden. Are you sure? It's been a long day. I nodded firmly. I'm sure. Don't wait dinner for me. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Very well. Don't be too late. I watched as he gathered my brothers, as they loaded tools into the wagon, as they drove away down the lane toward home. Other families departed as well, until only a handful of men remained to complete the day's final tasks. Bishop Lapp raised an eyebrow when I approached him, offering to help store the wheat, but he accepted without question. We worked efficiently, carrying bound sheaves into the new barn, stacking them carefully in the now completed hayloft. Each movement, each step, brought a flood of memories. Matt's hand in mine, his lips against my skin, his voice in the darkness. By the time we finished, twilight had deepened into dusk. Bishop Lapp and the remaining men bid me good night, departing down the lane toward their own homes. I waited until they were out of sight before turning back toward the barn. The structure stood solid against the darkening sky, testament to our community's collective strength. I climbed the ladder to the hayloft, now filled with sweet-smelling hay and wheat, and made my way to the far corner where Matt and I had spent that fateful night. The space looked different now, enclosed, permanent, functional. But as I settled onto a hay bale, I could still feel the echo of what had happened here, the promises and possibilities that had unfurled between us like night-blooming flowers. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in memory. The moonrise found me still in place, the leather cords now drawn from my pocket, wound between my fingers like a prayer. He hadn't come. Perhaps he had forgotten, or changed his mind, or simply moved on with his life as I had been unable to do. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of my soul, I rose, tucking the cords back into my pocket. It was time to go home, to accept that what had happened here had been nothing more than a brief detour from the path I was meant to walk. I descended the ladder and stepped out of the barn into the moonlit yard. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the black velvet of sky. In the distance, an owl called, its lonely cry echoing across the fields. My feet carried me automatically toward the edge of the property, toward the spot where we had said goodbye. I would allow myself this one last pilgrimage, this one final moment of remembrance, before turning my back on those brief, bright days and the feelings they had awakened in me. The cornfield had been partially harvested, stalks cut down to stubble in neat rows. At its edge, where the field met the tree line, a figure stood silhouetted against the night sky. My heart stopped, then began again in a thunderous rhythm that seemed to shake my entire body. I knew that silhouette, knew the set of those shoulders, the angle of that head. I had carried the memory of them with me for 4 long months. Matt, he hadn't seen me yet, was gazing out across the harvested field toward the distant horizon. I took a step forward, then another, my boots whispering against the dry grass. At the sound, he turned. Even in the dimness, I could see the moment he recognized me. His body straightening, tension leaving his shoulders, his face lifting in a smile that seemed to illuminate the night. "Eli," he said, my name a benediction on his lips. "You came," I replied, stopping a few paces from him, suddenly unsure. "I promised I would." His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, slightly rough, alive with emotion he made no effort to hide. "The question was whether you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted, the truth easier here in the darkness, away from watchful eyes. He nodded, acceptance in the gesture. "What changed your mind?" I reached into my pocket, withdrawing the leather cords, holding them out in my open palm. "These. You. Everything." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see his face clearly in the moonlight. He looked the same, yet somehow different. His hair a little longer, his eyes holding a weariness that hadn't been there before. Beautiful still, perhaps more so for the subtle changes. "I missed you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of the months that had separated us. "I missed you too," I whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "Every day." His hand rose, hesitating before gently touching my face, his palm warm against my cheek. I leaned into the touch, eyes closing as the sensation washed through me, familiar and new all at once. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me again," he said, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "You have so much to lose." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. "I have much to lose either way." Understanding flickered in his expression. He knew what I meant, that choosing to meet him here had been only the first step in a decision that would reshape my entire life, that nothing could be the same after this moment, regardless of what came next. "We should talk," he said, dropping his hand reluctantly, "somewhere more private." I nodded, glancing back toward the Miller property, where lights still glowed in the farmhouse windows. "The barn. The hayloft." A small smile curved his lips. "Where it all began." We walked in silence back toward the barn, careful to stay in the shadows, away from potential observation. The night wrapped around us like a cloak, offering temporary protection from the world and its judgments. Inside the barn, I led the way up the ladder, the familiar route now complicated by the darkness and the new configuration of the space. Matt followed close behind, his breathing steady in the quiet. The hayloft was shadowed, moonlight filtering through the small windows to cast silver patches across the hay-strewn floor. I made my way to the far corner, settling onto a bale of hay, Matt joining me a moment later. "I've thought about this place every day since I left," he said, gazing around at the now enclosed space. "About you." The simple admission made my heart clench with a mixture of joy and pain. "I tried not to think about you," I confessed, "about any of it. I tried to focus on my duties, on my upcoming baptism, on the life I was meant to lead." "And?" he prompted gently. I sighed, the sound loud in the quiet barn. "And I failed miserably. You were always there and in the back of my mind. In everything I did." His hand found mine in the darkness, warm and solid and real. "I came back for you, Eli. I need you to know that. Not just because I promised, but because I couldn't stay away." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. This wasn't just about attraction or forbidden pleasure. This was something deeper, something that had taken root during those few days we had shared and grown stronger in our separation. "What happens now?" I asked, the question encompassing all the uncertainties that stretched before us. Matt was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "That depends on you," he said finally. "On what you want." "I want," I began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the choice before me. I want things I shouldn't want. Things I've been taught are wrong. Like what? He asked, his voice gentle, encouraging. I turned to him, finding courage in the darkness. You, a different life. Freedom to choose my own path. The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air between us, impossible to take back. I had never articulated these desires before, had barely allowed myself to acknowledge them in the privacy of my own thoughts. Matt's grip on my hand tightened. Those things don't have to be wrong, Eli. They're only wrong here, in this place, according to these rules. There are other places, other ways to live. You make it sound so simple, I said, a hint of bitterness creeping into my voice. Just leave everything I've ever known, everyone I love. It's not simple, he acknowledged. It's probably the hardest choice you'll ever make, and I won't pretend it wouldn't come with loss, with pain. He paused, his face solemn in the moonlight. But it would come with gain, too. With possibilities you can't even imagine yet. I knew he spoke truth. I had seen the longing in the eyes of those who had left our community, who returned occasionally to visit family still within the vault. They grieved what they had lost, yes, but there was something else in them too. A freedom, an expansion, that both frightened and called to me. Tell me, I said suddenly, if I came with you, what would it be like? What would we do? Where would we go? A smile bloomed across his face, tentative at first, then widening with warmth. We could go anywhere. I have some money saved, enough to get us started somewhere new where no one knows us. His voice took on a dreamy quality. Maybe Oregon. I have friends there from when I worked on the fishing boats. We could rent a small place near the coast. You could see the ocean every day. The image he painted was so vivid I could almost taste the salt air, feel the sand beneath my feet. And then what? Then we build a life, he said simply. You could work with wood. You're skilled enough to find apprenticeship with a furniture maker, maybe eventually start your own business. I could go back to construction, or fishing, or find something new. He squeezed my hand. We'd figure it out together. Together, I repeated, the word both terrifying and exhilarating. As what? He understood the question beneath the question. As partners, Eli, in every way. He hesitated, then added softly, if that's what you want. Did I want that? A life with this man, this near stranger, who somehow knew me better than those I'd spent my entire life alongside? A relationship that my faith, my community, my family would condemn as sinful and unnatural. I thought of the nights I'd lain awake, the leather cords clutched in my hand, imagining his face, his touch, his voice. I thought of the emptiness that had filled me since his departure, the sense that something essential had been torn away. I thought of the life laid out before me, marriage to a suitable girl from our community, children, decades of sameness stretching into the distance. Yes, I whispered, the admission torn from some deep place inside me. That's what I want. Matt's breath caught audibly. He reached up, his hand cupping my face, turning me toward him. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I need you to be sure, Eli. Because once you make this choice, once you leave, there may be no coming back. I knew the truth of his words. Leaving the Amish wasn't just changing locations. It was severing ties with a way of life, with a community bound by strict rules. Those who left were often shunned, cut off from family and friends, as though they had ceased to exist. I'm not sure of anything, I admitted. Except how I feel when I'm with you. How I've felt every day since you left. I paused, gathering courage. I want to try, Matt. I want to see if what we feel for each other is real, is lasting. I want to see the ocean, and cities, and all the things I've only heard about. I trailed off, overwhelmed by the vastness of my own wanting, by desires I had never allowed myself to fully articulate. Matt leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine. Then let's try, he whispered. Together! The word hung between us, a promise and a challenge. I closed the small distance separating us, my lips finding his in the darkness. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as months of longing and separation dissolved in the warmth of connection renewed. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Matt's hands framed my face, his thumbs tracing the contours of my cheekbones. "When?" he asked simply. The question grounded me, pulling me from the realm of possibility into practicality. "I need time," I said, "to prepare, to say goodbye, even if only to myself." He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "The harvest ends on Friday. I'll be leaving on Saturday morning, taking the bus from town." He hesitated, then added, "I'll wait for you at the station. The bus leaves at 10. 3 days. 3 days to decide the course of my entire life, to choose between everything I had ever known and a leap into the unknown with this man who had somehow become the center of my world." "Saturday," I repeated, the word a commitment and a question all at once. "Saturday," he confirmed, sealing the promise with another kiss. We talked long into the night, wrapped in each other's arms in the hayloft that had witnessed the beginning of whatever this was between us. He told me more about Oregon, about the small coastal town where his friend lived, about the wild beauty of the Pacific shoreline, about the life we might build there. I spoke of my fears, of being shunned, of losing my family, of stepping into a world I knew almost nothing about. Matt listened without judgment, offering reassurance where he could, honesty where he couldn't. "It won't be easy," he acknowledged. "There will be days when you'll question everything, when you'll wonder if you made the right choice." "And on those days?" I asked, my head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arms tightened around me. "On those days, I'll remind you why you came. I'll hold you when you grieve what you've left behind. I'll help you build something new to put in its place." His words were a balm to fears I had barely acknowledged. He understood what I would be sacrificing, respected the magnitude of the choice before me. He wasn't offering fantasy but partnership. In joy and in pain. In gain and in loss. As midnight passed, we reluctantly separated. I needed to return home before my absence raised questions I couldn't answer. Matt would go back to Rachel's house in town, where he was staying until Saturday. At the barn door, he pulled me close one final time, his kiss a promise that lingered on my lips long after we had parted. "Saturday," he whispered against my ear. 10 o'clock. I'll be waiting. But Eli?" He pulled back, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "If you don't come, I'll understand. I'll leave knowing these days with you were worth everything, no matter what you choose." The generosity of his words made my throat tighten with emotion. He was offering me freedom, to choose him or not, without guilt, without pressure. "I'll be there," I said, though even as the words left my lips, I wasn't certain they were true. He smiled, a hint of sadness in the curve of his mouth. "I hope so. But either way, know that you've changed me, Eli Yoder. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for that." With one last touch, his fingers trailing down my arm, lingering briefly against my hand. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like a dream upon waking. I stood watching until I could no longer see him, then began the long walk home beneath the star-strewn sky. The leather cords rested in my pocket, a tangible reminder that what had happened was real, not merely a product of longing and imagination. 3 days stretched before me like an eternity. 3 days to say silent goodbyes to the only life I had ever known. 3 days to gather courage for a step that could never be taken back. 3 days to decide between faith and freedom, between duty and desire, between the safety of the known and the vast, terrifying possibility of the unknown. As I walked through the sleeping fields toward home, one thought crystallized in my mind, clear and undeniable as the stars overhead. Meeting Matt had awakened something in me that could never be put back to sleep. Whether I chose to follow him or not, I would never again be the same Eli Yoder who had carried a wooden beam across his shoulders to a barn raising 4 months ago. That Eli had never questioned his place in the world, had never imagined another path. That Eli had never known what it was to want something, someone, with such fierce, consuming intensity that it made everything else pale in comparison. That Eli was gone, transformed by a stranger's crooked smile and gentle hands, by whispered words in the darkness, by the simple revolutionary possibility of choice. Whatever I decided on Saturday, that transformation could not be undone. The question now was whether I had the courage to embrace it, to follow it wherever it might lead. Even if that path took me away from everything I had ever known, toward a future I could barely imagine, with a man who had somehow become the center of my world in the space of a few stolen days. The house was dark when I reached it, my family long since asleep. I moved silently through the familiar rooms, everything suddenly precious now that I contemplated leaving it behind. The worn kitchen table where we had gathered for meals every day of my life. The hook by the door where my father's hat always hung. The uneven floorboard near the hearth that creaked no matter how carefully one stepped. In my small bedroom, shared with two younger brothers, whose even breathing filled the darkness, I removed the leather cords from my pocket and slipped them beneath my pillow. As I lay down, their presence a secret warmth beneath my head, I gazed out the window at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the boundaries of our land, beyond the reach of rules I had never questioned until now, lay a different kind of life. A life with Matt. A life of my own choosing. 3 days to decide if I had the courage to reach for it. 3 days can pass like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold. The remaining harvest days blurred together, the familiar rhythm of work providing no comfort against the storm of indecision raging inside me. Each swing of the scythe, each bound sheaf, each shared meal felt both precious and distant, as though I viewed my own life through clouded glass. My father noticed my distraction, but attributed it to pre-baptismal contemplation. "It is good to consider such commitments deeply," he told me on Friday evening as we walked home from the fields. "Doubt before confirmation strengthens faith, not weakens it." His words, meant as comfort, cut deeper than he could know. The choice before me was not about strengthening faith but potentially abandoning it, at least in the form I had always known. I merely nodded, unwilling to speak falsehood, but unable to speak truth. That night, I lay awake long after my brothers had fallen asleep, the leather cords coiled in my palm. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. The moment of decision I could no longer postpone. I had not seen Matt since our meeting in the barn. We had agreed it was safer that way, less likely to raise suspicions. But his absence had been a physical ache, a constant awareness of something missing. I tried to imagine feeling that emptiness for the rest of my life, carrying it alongside me through marriage, children, decades of sameness. The thought was almost unbearable. Then I tried to imagine the alternative, leaving everything behind. My family, my community, the only way of life I had ever known. Stepping into a world I barely understood, with a man I had known for mere days, toward a future with no guarantees. Both paths seemed impossible, both heartbreaking in different ways. Around midnight, I slipped silently from my bed and out of the sleeping house. The night was clear, stars scattered like salt across the dark canvas of sky. I walked to the small rise behind our barn where a single oak tree stood sentinel over our fields. I had come here often as a child, seeking solitude or comfort. Now I came seeking clarity, some sign that might guide my impossible choice. "Show me the way," I whispered to the star-strewn heavens. "Please." But no divine guidance descended, no clear path revealed itself. There was only the night breeze rustling through autumn leaves, the distant call of an owl, the vast indifference of stars. I returned to my bed no closer to certainty than when I had left it. Morning arrived with merciless brightness, sunlight streaming through the small window beside my bed. I had slept little, but a strange calm had settled over me sometime in the pre-dawn hours. Not certainty, but acceptance. Whatever I decided today would change everything. There was no perfect choice, no path without loss. I rose and dressed with deliberate care, each familiar motion. The buttoning of my shirt, the donning of suspenders, the straightening of my hat, feeling ritualistic, final. The leather cords I tucked into my pocket, their presence a constant reminder of the decision that loomed. Breakfast passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal. My mother's concerned glance when I declined a second helping of eggs. My youngest brother's chatter about a nest of barn kittens he had discovered. My father's quiet plans for the day's work. I gazed at each of them, trying to memorize their faces, the cadence of their voices, the way sunlight filtered through the kitchen window to paint patterns across the worn wooden table. If I left, would these memories sustain me? Or would they haunt me, ghostly reminders of all I had abandoned? I need to go into town this morning, I said, as breakfast concluded, the words emerging with surprising steadiness. Bishop Lapp asked me to pick up supplies for the new schoolhouse. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I could not speak the truth. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. My father nodded, unsuspecting. Take the small wagon and be back by noon. We need to finish the Westfield today. Yes, father, I replied, the familiar response automatic despite the uncertainty that churned within me. I helped clear the breakfast dishes, each domestic movement a possible farewell. Then I collected my hat and coat, pausing at the door for one last look at the kitchen. At my mother kneading dough for the day's bread. At my brothers pulling on boots for morning chores. At my father reading from our worn family Bible in his seat by the window. I'll be back soon, I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. My mother looked up, smiling. Drive carefully. Out in the yard, I hitched our older horse to the small wagon. Movements I had performed 1,000 times, muscle memory guiding hands that trembled slightly with the weight of what might come. The journey into town took 30 minutes, the familiar landscape rolling past as though unchanged by the turmoil inside me. Fields giving way to scattered houses, then to the small cluster of buildings that constituted our town. The horse's steady clip-clop against the packed dirt road matched the pounding of my heart. As I approached the town center, where the small bus station stood beside the general store, my hands tightened on the reins. It was just past 9:30. Matt would be there already, waiting, hoping. I guided the wagon to the hitching post outside the general store, securing the horse with movements that felt disconnected from my racing thoughts. Then I stood, frozen, staring at the bus station across the street. Through the station's large front window, I could see several people waiting on the wooden benches inside. An older English couple with suitcases, a mother with a small child, and there, sitting alone near the door, a canvas duffel bag at his feet, was Matt. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes constantly moved to the door, to the station clock, back to the door. Waiting. For me. I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the leather cords. One step, then another, would take me to him. To a bus, to Oregon, to the unknown, to possibilities I had only begun to imagine. But my feet remained rooted in place, unable to move forward, unwilling to turn back. A movement caught my eye. Rachel Miller, emerging from her quilting shop 2 doors down from the station. She saw me immediately, raising a hand in greeting as she crossed the street toward me. Eli, she said as she approached, her voice warm, but her eyes searching my face with unsettling perception. Are you well? You look troubled. I swallowed hard, struggling to find words that wouldn't reveal too much. I'm fine, Mrs. Miller, just thinking. She followed my gaze to the bus station, to Matt visible through the window. Understanding dawned in her eyes, but not judgment, something softer, more complex. He's a good man, she said quietly. Different from us, but good. The simple statement startled me. How much did she know? How much had Matt told her? I don't know what you mean, I said, the denial reflexive. She smiled slightly, the expression tinged with sadness. I think you do, Eli Yoder. She paused, then added, My cousin's son has a kind heart. He feels deeply. Too deeply, sometimes. I remained silent, afraid that any word might betray the storm inside me. The bus leaves in 20 minutes, Rachel continued, her voice gentle. To Columbus, then connections west. She hesitated, then placed a hand lightly on my arm. Whatever you decide, be certain it's what you truly want. Not what others expect, not what fear dictates, but what your heart knows to be right. The touch, the words, so unexpected from this proper Amish woman, broke something loose inside me. How did you know? I whispered. Her smile deepened, revealing an unexpected warmth. I have eyes, Eli, and I was young once, with dreams of my own. She glanced toward the station, toward Matt. Some choices we regret making. Others we regret not making. The hardest part is knowing which is which before time decides for us. With that cryptic statement, she squeezed my arm once more, then released it. I should return to my shop. Customers will be arriving soon. She took a step back, then paused. Matthew told me to give you a message if I saw you today. My heart stuttered. What message? That the ocean is even more beautiful than he described, and that some journeys are worth taking, even when the path is uncertain. With those words, she turned and walked back toward her shop, leaving me standing alone with a decision I could no longer postpone. Inside the station, Matt checked the clock again. 15 minutes until the bus departed. Soon he would know my answer, one way or another. I closed my eyes, fingers tightening around the leather cords in my pocket. Every lesson I had been taught, every rule I had lived by, every expectation laid upon me since birth pulled me back toward the wagon, toward home, toward the life that had been carefully prescribed for me. But when I opened my eyes, they fixed unerringly on Matt's face through the window, on the hope and fear warring in his expression, on the vulnerability he made no attempt to hide. And something deeper than lessons or rules or expectations pulled me forward across the street toward the station door. My hand closed around the handle. One turn, one step, would commit me to a path I could never undo. I thought of my family, of the pain and confusion my disappearance would cause them. I thought of my community, of the life I had been raised to live. I thought of all I would be leaving behind, traditions, certainties, connections that ran as deep as blood. Then I thought of Matt, of his hand in mine, of his voice in the darkness. You ever wonder what it'd be like to want something you can't name? I did know. I had named it now. Freedom, choice, love. With a deep breath that felt like the first of a new life, I opened the door and stepped inside. Matt's head jerked up at the sound, his eyes finding mine instantly. For one frozen moment, we simply stared at each other across the small waiting room, the air between us charged with possibility. Then he stood, slowly, as though afraid any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Eli, he said, my name barely audible over the station's ambient noise. I crossed to him, aware of curious glances from the other waiting passengers, but beyond caring what they might think. I came, I said simply. The smile that bloomed across his face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, radiant with joy and relief. You came, he repeated, as though needing to hear the words to believe them. I can't promise this is the right choice, I said quietly, needing him to understand the doubts that still lingered. I can't promise I won't regret it sometimes. I can't promise I won't miss everything I'm leaving behind. Matt nodded, his expression growing serious. I know. I wouldn't believe you if you did promise those things. He took a tentative step closer. All I can promise is that you won't face any of it alone. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Together. The words still sent a thrill of fear and excitement through me. I reached into my pocket, withdrawing the leather cords that had become a talisman of sorts, a physical link between what had been and what might be. I kept these, I said, holding them out in my palm. Every day since you left. Matt's eyes softened as he looked at the simple leather strands. He covered my hand with his, warm and solid and real. New beginnings from old bindings, he said softly. A voice announced the bus's imminent departure, breaking the moment between us. Matt glanced toward the waiting vehicle visible through the station windows, then back to me. Are you sure, Eli? He asked, giving me one last chance to turn back. This is your home, your life. Once we board that bus. I'm sure, I interrupted, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Not of what comes next, but of this moment. Of you. The simple declaration seemed to take his breath away. His hand tightened around mine, then released it as he bent to pick up his duffel bag. What about your things? He asked. glancing at my empty hands. I shook my head. I came with nothing. It seemed right, somehow. Understanding flickered in his eyes. What I was choosing couldn't be contained in luggage, couldn't be eased by familiar possessions. This was a clean break, a step into the unknown with nothing but the clothes on my back and the man beside me. "We'll figure it out," he said, the simple statement somehow encompassing all the practical concerns of the life we were about to begin. Together. As we moved toward the but a sudden thought stopped me. "The wagon," I said. "The horse. I can't just leave them here." Matt considered for a moment. "Rachel," he said, "she'll make sure they get back to your family. Wait here." He crossed quickly to the ticket counter, spoke briefly with the clerk, who nodded and reached for the telephone. Minutes later, Rachel appeared at the station door, her expression a mixture of surprise and something like wistful approval when she saw us together. "The wagon," I began, but she nodded before I could explain. "I'll see it returned, with a note saying you were needed elsewhere," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's all I can offer, Eli. The rest will be harder." I knew what she meant. My family would search for me, would worry, would eventually have to accept that I had chosen to leave. The community would gossip, would probably assume I had gone into the English world during my Rumspringa, would eventually close ranks around my absence. And I would never be able to explain, never be able to tell them the truth about why I had gone, where, or with whom. The realization was a physical ache in my chest. "Thank you," I said to Rachel, the words utterly inadequate for what she was doing for us. She smiled, a hint of sadness in the expression. "Live well, Eli Yoder, both of you." Her eyes moved to Matt. "Take care of each other. The world is harder than it looks from here." Matt nodded, solemn. "We will." The final boarding call came, urgent in the small station. With one last nod to Rachel, we turned toward the waiting bus, toward the first step of a journey that would take us far from everything familiar. As we settled into seats near the back, Matt's hand found mine, fingers entwining with easy familiarity. Through the window, I could see Rachel standing in the station doorway, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the only world I had ever known. The bus's engine rumbled to life, vibrating beneath us. Matt's grip on my hand tightened slightly, a question in the pressure. "Okay?" he asked softly. I looked at him, at the green eyes that had somehow seen past all my careful barriers, at the face that had become more familiar to me than my own reflection. In his gaze, I saw not just desire or affection, but something deeper, more enduring. A promise of partnership, of understanding, of acceptance for all that I was and all that I might become. "Okay," I answered, squeezing his hand in return. As the bus pulled away from the station, I did not look back at the town receding behind us. Instead, I looked forward, toward Matt, toward the uncertain road ahead, toward possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. The leather cords rested in my pocket, no longer a reminder of what had been, but a talisman for what might be. Old bindings transformed into new beginnings, constraints reborn as connections. "Tell me about the ocean again," I said, as the bus gathered speed, carrying us toward a future neither of us could predict, but that we would face together. Matt smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that had first caught my attention months ago at a barn raising that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. "The ocean," he began, his voice painting pictures of endless horizons, of boundless possibilities, of a world larger and more wondrous than I had ever dared to imagine. As he spoke, I felt something unfurl inside me. Not certainty, not freedom from doubt, but something equally precious. Hope. Hope for the journey we were beginning. Hope for the which we might build together. Hope for the man I might become, away from the constraints that had both sheltered and limited me. The bus crested a hill, and suddenly the landscape opened before us. Rolling fields giving way to distant horizons, the road unwinding like a promise toward whatever waited beyond the boundaries of all I had known. I was leaving behind certainty, tradition, belonging. The weight of that loss would remain with me, would shape who I became as surely as my upbringing had. But as Matt's voice washed over me, as his hand remained warm and steady in mine, I knew with unexpected clarity that I was moving not just away from something, but toward something, toward a life of my own choosing, toward the vast, terrifying, exhilarating possibility of becoming truly myself. And for now, for this moment speeding away from everything familiar, that knowledge was enough. And